Chapter 16. Ulf joined them as they looked down at the exposed brain of the magter. The thing was so clearly evident that even Ulf noticed it. "I have seen dead animals, and my people dead with their heads open. But I have never seen anything like that before," he said. "What is it?" Brion asked. "The invader, the alien you were looking for," Leah told him. The magter's brain was only 2/3 of what would have been its normal size. Instead of filling the skull completely, it shared the space with a green, amorphous shape. This was ridged, somewhat like a brain, but the green shape had still darker nodules and extensions. Leah took her scalpel and gently prodded the dark, moist mass. "It reminds me very much of something that I've seen before on Earth," she said. "The green fly, Drepanosiphum plantainoides, and an unusual organ it has called the pseudova. Now that I have seen this growth in the magter's skull, I can think of a positive parallel. The fly Drepanosiphum also has a large green organ, only it fills half the body cavity instead of the head. Its identity puzzled biologists for years, and they had a number of complex theories to explain it. Finally, someone managed to dissect and examine it. The pseudova turned out to be a living plant, a yeast-like growth that helps with the green fly's digestion. It produces enzymes that enable the fly to digest the great amounts of sugar it gets from plant juice." "That's not unusual," Brion said, puzzled. "Termites and human beings are a couple of other creatures whose digestion is helped by internal flora. What's the difference in the green fly?" "Reproduction mainly. All the other gut-living plants have to enter the host and establish themselves as outsiders, permitted to remain as long as they are useful. The green fly and its yeast plant have a permanent symbiotic relationship that is essential to the existence of both. The plant spores appear in many places throughout the fly's body, but they are always in the germ cells. Every cell has some, and every egg cell that grows to maturity is infected with the plant spores. The continuation of the symbiosis is unbroken and guaranteed." "Do you think those green spheres in the magter's blood cells could be the same kind of thing?" Brion asked. "I'm sure of it," Leah said. "It must be the same process. There are probably green spheres throughout the magter's bodies, spores, or offspring of those things living in their brains. Enough will find their way to the germ cells to make sure that every young magter is infected at birth. While the child is growing, so is the symbiote, probably a lot faster since it seems to be a simpler organism. I imagine it is well established in the brain pan within the first 6 months of the infant's life." "But why?" Brion asked. "What does it do?" "I'm only guessing now, but there is plenty of evidence that gives us an idea of its function. I'm willing to bet that the symbiote itself is not a simple organism. It's probably an amalgam of plant and animal, like most other creatures on Dis. The thing is just too complex to have developed since mankind has been on this planet. The magter must have caught the symbiotic infection eating some Disan animal. The symbiote lived and flourished in its new environment, well protected by a bony skull and a long-lived host. In exchange for food, oxygen, and comfort, the brain symbiote must generate hormones and enzymes that enable the magter to survive. Some of these might aid digestion, enabling the magter to eat any plant or animal life they can lay their hands on. The symbiote might produce sugar, scavenge the blood of toxins. There are so many things it could do. Things it must have done, since the magter are obviously the dominant life form on this planet. They paid a high price for the symbiote, but it didn't matter to race survival until now. Did you notice that the magter's brain is no smaller than normal?" "It must be. Or how else could that brain symbiote fit inside the skull with it?" Brion said. "If the magter's total brain were smaller in volume than normal, it could fit into the remaining space in the cranial hollow. But the brain is full-sized, it's just that part of it is missing, absorbed by the symbiote." "The frontal lobes," Brion said with sudden realization. "This hellish growth has performed a prefrontal lobotomy." "It's done even more than that," Leah said, separating the convolutions of gray matter with her scalpel to uncover a green filament beneath. "These tendrils penetrate further back into the brain, but always remain within the cerebrum. The cerebellum appears to be untouched. Apparently just the higher functions of mankind have been interfered with, selectively. Destruction of the frontal lobes made the magter creatures without emotion, or the ability for really abstract thought. Apparently, they survived better without these. There must have been some horrible failures before the right balance was struck. The final product is a man-plant-animal symbiote that is admirably adapted for survival on this disaster world. No emotions to cause complications or desires that might interfere with pure survival. Complete ruthlessness. Mankind has always been strong on this anyway, so it didn't take much of a push. The other Disans, like Ulfhere, managed to survive without turning into such a creature, so why was it necessary for the magter to go so far? Nothing is necessary in evolution, you know that, Leah said. Many variations are possible, and all the better ones continue. You might say that Ulf's people survive, but the magter survive better. If off-world contact hadn't been re-established, I imagine the magter would slowly have become the dominant race. Only they won't have the chance now. It looks as though they have succeeded in destroying both races with their suicidal urge. That's the part that doesn't make sense, Brion said. The magter have survived and climbed right to the top of the evolutionary heap here. Yet they are suicidal. How does it happen they haven't been wiped out before this? Individually, they have been aggressive to the point of suicide. They will attack anything and everything with the same savage lack of emotion. Luckily, there are no bigger animals on this planet. So where they have died as individuals, their utter ruthlessness has guaranteed their survival as a group. Now they are faced with a problem that is too big for their half-destroyed minds to handle. Their personal policy has become their planetary policy, and that's never a smart thing. They are like men with knives who have killed all the men who were only armed with stones. Now they are facing men with guns, and they are going to keep charging and fighting until they are all dead. It's a perfect case of the utter impartiality of the forces of evolution. Men infected by this Disan life form were the dominant creatures on this planet. The creature in the magter's brains was a true symbiote then, giving something and receiving something, making a union of symbiotes where all were stronger together than any could be separately. Now, this has changed. The magter brain cannot understand the concept of racial death in a situation where it must understand to be able to survive. Therefore, the brain creature is no longer a symbiote, but a parasite. And as a parasite it must be destroyed, Brion broke in. We're not fighting shadows anymore, he exulted. We've found the enemy, and it's not the magter at all, just a glorified tapeworm that is too stupid to know when it is killing itself off. Does it have a brain? Can it think? I doubt it very much, Leah said. A brain would be of absolutely no use to it. So even if it originally possessed reasoning powers, they would be gone by now. Symbiotes or parasites that live internally like this always degenerate to an absolute minimum of functions.
Tell me about it. What is this thing?
Ulf broke in, prodding the soft form of the brain symbiote. He had heard all their excited talk, but had not understood a word. Explain it to him, will you, Leah? As best you can, Brion said, looking at her, and he realized how exhausted she was. And sit down while you do it. You're long overdue for a rest. I'm going to try... He broke off when he looked at his watch. It was after 4 in the afternoon. Less than 8 hours to go. What was he to do? Enthusiasm faded as he realized that only half the problem was solved. The bombs would drop on schedule, unless the Nyorders could understand the significance of this discovery. Even if they understood, would it make any difference to them? The threat of the hidden cobalt bombs would not be changed. With this thought came the guilty realization that he had forgotten completely about Telt's death. Even before he contacted the Nyord fleet, he must tell Hiss and his rebel army what had happened to Telt and his sandcar. Also, about the radioactive traces. They couldn't be checked against the records now to see how important they might be, but Hiss might make another raid on the strength of the suspicion. This call wouldn't take long. Then he would be free to tackle Professor Commander Croft. Carefully setting the transmitter on the frequency of the rebel army, he sent out a call to Hiss. There was no answer. When he switched to receive, all he heard was static. There was always a chance the set was broken. He quickly twisted the transmitter to the frequency of his personal radio, then whistled in the microphone. The received signal was so loud that it hurt his ears. He tried to call Hiss again, and was relieved to get a response this time. Brion Brandd here. Can you read me? I want to talk to Hiss at once. It came as a shock that it was Professor Commander Croft who answered.
I'm sorry, Brion, but it's impossible to talk to Hiss. We are monitoring his frequency and your call was relayed to me. Hiss and his rebels lifted ship about half an hour ago, and are already on their way back to Nyhord. Are you ready to leave now? It will soon become dangerous to make any landings. Even now I will have to ask for volunteers to get you out of there.
Hiss and the rebel army gone? Brion assimilated the thought. He had been thrown off balance when he realized he was talking to Croft. If they're all gone, well, then there's nothing I can do about it, he said. I was going to call you, so I can talk to you now. Listen, and try to understand. You must cancel the bombing. I found out about the magter, found what causes their mental aberration. If we can correct that, we can stop them from attacking Nyhord.
Can they be corrected by midnight tonight?
Croft broke in. He was abrupt and sounded almost angry. Even saints get tired. No, of course not. Brion frowned at the microphone, realizing the talk was going all wrong, but not knowing how to remedy it. But it won't take too long. I have evidence here that will convince you that what I say is the truth.
I believe you without seeing it, Brion.
The trace of anger was gone from Croft's voice now, and it was heavy with fatigue and defeat.
I'll admit you are probably right. A little while ago I admitted to Hiss, too, that he was probably right in his original estimation of the correct way to tackle the problem of Dis. We have made a lot of mistakes, and in making them we have run out of time. I am afraid that is the only fact that is relevant now. The bombs fall at 12, and even then they may drop too late. A ship is already on its way from Nyhord with my replacement. I exceeded my authority by running a day past the maximum the technicians gave me. I realize now I was gambling the life of my own world in the vain hope I could save Dis. They can't be saved. They're dead. I won't hear any more about it.
You must listen.
I must destroy the planet below me. That is what I must do. That fact will not be changed by anything you say. All the off-worlders other than your party are gone. I'm sending a ship down now to pick you up. As soon as that ship lifts, I am going to drop the first bombs. Now, tell me where you are so they can come for you.
Don't threaten me, Croft!
Brion shook his fist at the radio in an excess of anger.
You're a killer and a world destroyer. Don't try to make yourself out as anything else. I have knowledge to avert this slaughter and you won't listen to me. And I know where the cobalt bombs are, in the magter tower that Hiss raided last night. Get those bombs and there is no need to drop any of your own.
I'm sorry, Brion. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but at the same time I know the futility of it. I'm not going to accuse you of lying, but do you realize how thin your evidence sounds from this end? First, a dramatic discovery of the cause of the magter's intransigency. Then, when that had no results, you suddenly remember you know where the bombs are. The best-kept magter secret.
I don't know for sure, but there is a very good chance it is so, Brion said, trying to repair his defenses. Telt made readings. He had other records of radioactivity in the same magter keep, proof that something is there. But Telt is dead now, the record's destroyed. Don't you see? He broke off, realizing how vague and unprovable his case was. This was defeat. The radio was silent, with just the hum of the carrier wave as Croft waited for him to continue. When Brion did speak, his voice was empty of all hope. Send your ship down, he said tiredly. We're in a building that belonged to the Light Metals Trust Limited. A big warehouse of some kind. I don't know the address here, but I'm sure you have someone there who can find it. We'll be waiting for you. You win, Croft. He turned off the radio.
Chapter 17. Do you mean what you said about giving up? Leah asked. Brion realized that she had stopped talking to Olive some time ago and had been listening to his conversation with Kraft. He shrugged, trying to put his feelings into words. We've tried, and almost succeeded. But if they won't listen, what can we do? What can one man possibly do against a fleet loaded with H-bombs? As if in answer to that question, Ulf's voice drowned him out, the harsh Disan words slashing the silence of the room. "Kill you, the enemy," he said. "Kill you, Umedvirk." He shouted the last word, and his hand flashed to his belt. In a single swift motion, he lifted his blowgun and placed it to his lips. A tiny dart quivered in the already dead flesh of the creature in the magter's skull. The action had all the symbolism of a broken lance, the declaration of war. "Ulv understands it a lot better than you might think," Leah said. "He knows things about symbiosis and mutualism that would give him a job as a lecturer in any university on Earth. He knows just what the brain symbiote is and what it does. They even have a word for it, one that never appeared in our Disan language lessons. A life form that you can live with or cooperate with is called a medvirk. One that works to destroy you is a umedvirk. He also understands that life forms can change and be medvirk or umedvirk at different times. He has just decided that the brain symbiote is umedvirk, and he is out to kill it. So will the rest of the Disans as soon as he can show them the evidence and explain." "You're sure of this?" Brion asked, interested in spite of himself. "Positive. The Disans have an absolute attitude toward survival. You should realize that. Not the same as the magter, but not much different in the results. They will kill the brain symbiotes, even if it means killing every magter who harbors one." "If that is the case, we can't leave now," Brion said. With these words, it suddenly became clear what he had to do. "The ship is coming down now from the fleet. Get in it, and take the body of the magter. I won't go." "Where will you be?" she asked, shocked. "Fighting the magter. My presence on the planet means that Kraft won't keep his threat to drop the bombs any earlier than the midnight deadline. That would be deliberately murdering me. I doubt if my presence past midnight will stop him, but it should keep the bombs away at least until then." "What will you accomplish besides committing suicide?" Leah pleaded. "You just told me how a single man can't stop the bombs. What will happen to you at midnight?" "I'll be dead. But in spite of that, I can't run away. Not now. I must do everything possible right up until the last instant. Ulv and I will go to the magter tower, try to find out if the bombs are there. He will fight on our side now. He may even know more about the bombs, things that he didn't want to tell me before. We can get help from his people. Some of them must know where the bombs are, being native to this planet." Leah started to say something, but he rushed on, drowning out her words. "You have just as big a job. Show the magter to Kraft. Explain the significance of the brain parasite to him. Try to get him to talk to Heis about the last raid. Try to get him to hold off the attack. I'll keep the radio with me, and as soon as I know anything, I'll call in. This is all last resort, finger in the dike kind of stuff, but it is all we can do, because if we do nothing, it means the end of Dis." Leah tried to argue with him, but he wouldn't listen to her. He only kissed her, and with a lightness he did not feel, tried to convince her that everything would be all right. In their hearts, they both knew it wouldn't be, but they left it that way because it was the least painful solution. A sudden rumbling shook the building, and the windows darkened as a ship settled in the street outside. The Niger crew came in with guns pointed, alert for anything. After a little convincing, they took the cadaver, as well as Leah, when they lifted ship. Brion watched the spacer become a pinpoint in the sky and vanish. He tried to shake off the feeling that this was the last time he would see any of them. "Let's get out of here fast," he told Ulv, picking up the radio, "before anyone comes around to see why the ship landed." "What will you do?" Ulv asked as they went down the street towards the desert. "What can we do in the few hours we have left?" He pointed at the sun nearing the horizon. Brion shifted the weight of the radio to his other hand before replying. "Get to the magter tower we raided last night. That's the best chance. The bombs might be there, unless you know where the bombs are." Ulf shook his head. "I do not know, but some of my people may. We will capture a magter, then kill him, so they can all see the umedvirk. Then they will tell us everything they know. The tower first, then, for bombs or a sample magter. What's the fastest way we can get there?" Ulf frowned in thought. "If you can drive one of the cars the off-worlders use, I know where there are some locked-in buildings in this city. None of my people know how they are made to move. I can work them. Let's go. Chance was with him this time. The first sandcar they found still had the keys in the lock. It was battery-powered but contained a full charge. Much quieter than the heavy atomic cars, it sped smoothly out of the city and across the sand. Ahead of them, the sun sank in a red wave of color. It was 6 o'clock. By the time they reached the tower, it was 7, and Brion's nerves felt as if they were writhing under his skin. Even though it looked like suicide, attacking the tower brought blessed relief. It was movement and action, and for moments at a time he forgot the bombs hanging over his head. The attack was nerve-wrackingly anticlimactic. They used the main entrance, Ulv ranging soundlessly ahead. There was no one in sight. Once inside, they crept down towards the lower rooms where the radiation had been detected. Only gradually did they realize the magter tower was completely empty. Everyone gone, Ulv grunted, sniffing the air in every room they passed. Many magter were here earlier, but they are gone now. Do they often desert their towers? Brion asked. Never. I have never heard of it happening before. I can think of no reason why they should do a thing like this. Well, I can, Brion told him. They would leave their home if they took something with them of greater value. The bombs. If the bombs were hidden here, they might move them after the attack. Sudden fear hit him. Or they might move them because it is time to take them to the launcher. Let's get out of here the quickest way we can. I smell air from outside, Ulv said, coming from down there. This cannot be because the magter have no entrances this low in their towers. We blasted one in earlier. That could be it. Can you find it? Moonlight shone ahead as they turned an angle of the corridor, and stars were visible through the gaping opening in the wall. It looks bigger than it was, Brion said, as if the magter had enlarged it. He looked through and saw the tracks in the sand outside, as if they enlarged it to bring something bulky up from below, and carried it away in whatever made those tracks. Using the opening themselves, they ran back to the sandcar. Brion ground it fiercely around and turned the headlights on the tracks. There were marks of a sandcar's tread, half obscured by thin, unmarked wheel tracks. He turned off the lights and forced himself to move slowly and to do an accurate job. A quick glimpse at his watch showed him there were 4 hours left to go. The moonlight was bright enough to illuminate the tracks. Driving with one hand, he turned on the radio transmitter, already set for Kraft's wavelength. When the operator acknowledged his signal, Brion reported what they had discovered and his conclusions. Get that message to Commander Kraft now. I can't wait to talk to him. I'm following the tracks. He killed the transmission and stamped on the accelerator. The sandcar churned and bounced down the track. They are going to the mountains, Ulv said some time later, as the track still pointed straight ahead. There are caves there, and many magter have been seen near them. That is what I have heard. The guess was correct. Before 9 o'clock, the ground humped into a range of foothills, and the darker masses of mountains could be seen behind them, rising up to obscure the stars. Stop the car here, Ulv said. The caves begin not too far ahead. There may be magter watching or listening, so we must go quietly. Brion followed the deep-cut grooves, carrying the radio. Ulv came and went on both sides, silently as a shadow, scouting for hidden watchers. As far as he could discover, there were none. By 9:30, Brion realized they had deserted the sandcar too soon. The tracks wound on and seemed to have no end. They passed some caves which Ulf pointed out to him, but the tracks never stopped. Time was running out, and the nightmare stumbling through the darkness continued. More caves ahead, Ulf said. Go quietly. They came cautiously to the crest of a hill, as they had done so many times already, and looked into the shadow valley beyond. Sand covered the valley floor, and the light of the setting moon shone over the tracks at a flat angle, marking them off sharply as lines of shadow. They ran straight across the sand valley and disappeared into the dark mouth of a cave on the far side. Sinking back behind the hilltop, Brion covered the pilot light with his hand and turned on the transmitter. Ulf stayed above him, staring at the opening of the cave. "This is an important message," Brion whispered into the mic. "Please record." He repeated this for 30 seconds, glancing at his watch to make sure of the time, since the seconds of waiting stretched to minutes in his brain. Then, as clearly as possible without raising his voice above a whisper, he told of the discovery of the tracks and the cave. "The bombs may or may not be in here, but we are going in to find out. I'll leave my personal transmitter here with the broadcast power turned on so you can home on its signal. That will give you a directional beacon to find the cave. I'm taking the other radio in. It has more power. If we can't get back to the entrance, I'll try a signal from inside. I doubt you will hear it because of the rock, but I'll try. End of transmission. Don't try to answer me because I have the receiver turned off. There are no earphones on this set and the speaker would be too loud here." He switched off, held his thumb on the button for an instant, then flicked it back on. "Goodbye, Leah," he said, and killed the power for good. They circled and reached the rocky wall of the cliff. Creeping silently in the shadows, they slipped up on the dark entrance of the cave. Nothing moved ahead, and there was no sound from the entrance of the cave. Brion glanced at his watch and was instantly sorry. 10:30. The last shelter concealing them was 5 meters from the cave. They started to rise, to rush the final distance, when Ulf suddenly waved Brion down. He pointed to his nose, then to the cave. He could smell the magter there. A dark figure separated itself from the greater darkness of the cave mouth. Ulf acted instantly. He stood up and his hand went to his mouth. Air hissed faintly through the tube in his hand. Without a sound, the magter folded and fell to the ground. Before the body hit, Ulf crouched low and rushed in. There was the sudden scuffling of feet on the floor, then silence. Brion walked in, gun ready and alert, not knowing what he would find. His toe pushed against a body on the ground, and from the darkness Ulf whispered, "There were only 2. We can go on now." Finding their way through the cave was maddening torture. They had no light, nor would they dare use one if they had. There were no wheel marks to follow the stone floor. Without Ulf's sensitive nose, they would have been completely lost. The cave branched and rejoined, and they soon lost all sense of direction. Walking was almost impossible. They had to grope with their hands before them like blind men. Stumbling and falling against the rock, their fingers were soon throbbing and raw from brushing against rough walls. Ulf followed the scent of the magter that hung in the air where they had passed. When it grew thin, he knew they had left the frequently used tunnels and entered deserted ones. They could only retrace their steps and start again in a different direction. More maddening than the walking was the way time was running out. Inexorably, the glowing hands crept around the face of Brion's watch until they stood at 15 minutes before 12. "There is a light ahead," Ulf whispered, and Brion almost gasped with relief. They moved slowly and silently until they stood, concealed by the darkness, looking out into a domed chamber brightly lit by glowing tubes. "What is it?" Ulf asked, blinking in a painful wash of illumination after the long darkness. Brion had to fight to control his voice, to stop from shouting. "The cage with the metal webbing is a jump space generator. The pointed silver shapes next to us are bombs of some kind, probably the cobalt bombs. We found it." His first impulse was to instantly send the radio call that would stop the waiting fleet of H-bombers. But an unconvincing message would be worse than no message at all. He had to describe exactly what he saw here so the Nyjorders would know he wasn't lying. What he told them had to fit exactly with the information they already had about the launcher and the bombs. The launcher had been jury-rigged from a ship's jump space generator. That was obvious. The generator and its controls were neatly cased and mounted. Cables ran from them to a roughly constructed cage of woven metal straps, hammered and bent into shape by hand. 3 technicians were working on the equipment. Brion wondered what sort of bloodthirsty war lovers the magter had found to handle the bombing for them. Then he saw the chains around their necks and the bloody wounds on their backs. He still found it difficult to have any pity for them. They had obviously been willing to accept money to destroy another planet, or they wouldn't have been working here. They had probably rebelled only when they discovered how suicidal the attack would be. 13 minutes to midnight. Cradling the radio against his chest, Brion rose to his feet. He had a better view of the bombs now. There were 12 of them, alike as eggs from the same deadly clutch, pointed like the bow of a spacer. Each one swept smoothly back for its 2 meters of length to a sharply chopped off end. They were obviously incomplete, the warheads of rockets. One had its base turned towards him, and he saw 6 projecting studs that could be used to attach it to the missing rocket. A circular inspection port was open in the flat base of the bomb. This was enough. With this description, the Nyjorders would know he couldn't be lying about finding the bombs. Once they realized this, they couldn't destroy Dis without first trying to neutralize them. Brion carefully counted 50 paces before he stopped. He was far enough from the cavern so he couldn't be heard, and an angle of the cave cut out all light from behind him. With carefully controlled movements, he turned on the power, switched the set to transmit, and checked the broadcast frequency. All correct. Then, slowly and clearly, he described what he had seen in the cavern behind him. He kept his voice emotionless, recounting facts, leaving out anything that might be considered an opinion. It was 6 minutes before midnight when he finished. He thumbed the switch to receive and waited. There was only silence. Slowly, the empty quality of the silence penetrated his numbed mind. There were no crackling atmospherics nor hiss of static, even when he turned the power full on. The mass of rock and earth of the mountain above was acting as a perfect grounding screen, absorbing his signal even at maximum output. They hadn't heard him. The Nyjord fleet didn't know that the cobalt bombs had been discovered before their launching. The attack would go ahead as planned. Even now the bomb bay doors were opening. Armed H-bombs hung above the planet, held in place only by their shackles. In a few minutes the signal would be given, and the shackles would spring open, the bombs drop clear. "Killers!" Brion shouted into the microphone. "You wouldn't listen to reason, you wouldn't listen to Hayes or me or to any voice that suggested an alternative to complete destruction. You're going to destroy Dis, and it's not necessary. There were a lot of ways you could have stopped it. You didn't do any of them, and now it's too late. You'll destroy Dis, and in turn this will destroy Nyjord. Aijel said that, and now I believe him. You're just another damned failure in a galaxy full of failures." He raised the radio above his head and sent it crashing into the rock floor. Then he was running back to Ulv, trying to run away from the realization that he too had tried and failed. The people on the surface of Dis had less than 2 minutes left to live. "They didn't get my message," Brion said to Ulv. "The radio won't work this far underground." "Then the bombs will fall?" Ulv asked, looking searchingly at Brion's face in the dim reflected light from the cavern. "Unless something happens we know nothing about. The bombs will fall." They said nothing after that. They simply waited. The 3 technicians in the cavern were also aware of the time. They were calling to each other and trying to talk to the magter. The emotionless, parasite-ridden brains of the magter saw no reason to stop work, and they attempted to beat the men back to their tasks. In spite of the blows, they didn't go. They only gaped in horror as the clock hands moved remorselessly towards 12. Even the magter dimly felt some of the significance of the occasion. They stopped too and waited. The hour hand touched 12 on Brion's watch, then the minute hand. The second hand closed the gap, and for 1/10 of a second 3 hands were on one. Then the second hand moved on. Brion's immediate sensation of relief was washed away by the chilling realization that he was deep underground. Sound and seismic waves were slow, and the flare of atomic explosions couldn't be seen here. If the bombs had been dropped at 12, they wouldn't know it at once. A distant rumble filled the air. A moment later the ground heaved under them and the lights in the cavern flickered. Fine dust drifted down from the roof above. Ulv turned to him, but Brion looked away. He could not face the accusation in the Disan's eyes. Chapter 18. One of the technicians was running and screaming. The magter knocked him down and beat him into silence. Seeing this, the other two men returned to work with shaking hands. Even if all life on the surface of the planet was dead, this would have no effect on the magter. They would go ahead as planned, without emotion or imagination enough to alter their set course. As the technicians worked, their attitude changed from shocked numbness to anger. Right and wrong were forgotten. They had been killed. The invisible death of radiation must already be penetrating into the caves. But they also had the chance for vengeance. Swiftly they brought their work to completion, with the speed and precision they had concealed before. "What are those off-worlders doing?" Ulf asked. Brion stirred from his lethargy of defeat and looked across the cavern floor. The men had a wheeled hand truck and were rolling one of the atomic warheads onto it. They pushed it over to the latticework of the jump field. "They're going to bomb Nyjord now, just as Nyjord bombed Dis. That machine will hurl the bombs in a special way to the other planet." "Will you stop them?" Ulf asked. He had his deadly blowgun in his hand, and his face was an expressionless mask. Brion almost smiled at the irony of the situation. In spite of everything he had done to prevent it, Nyjord had dropped the bombs. And this act alone may have destroyed their own planet. Brion had it within his power now to stop the launching in the cavern. Should he? Should he save the lives of his killers? Or should he practice the ancient blood oath that had echoed and destroyed down through the ages? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It would be so simple. He literally had to do nothing. The score would be even, and his and the Disan's death avenged. Did Ulf have his blowgun ready to kill Brion with if he should try to stop the launchings? Or had he misread the Disan entirely? "Will you stop them, Ulf?" he asked. How large was mankind's sense of obligation? The caveman first had this feeling for his mate, then for his family. It grew until men fought and died for the abstract ideas of cities and nations, then for whole planets. Would the time ever come when men might realize that the obligation should be to the largest and most encompassing reality of all, mankind, and beyond that to life of all kinds? Brion saw this idea, not in words, but as a reality. When he posed the question to himself in this way, he found that it stated clearly its inherent answer. He pulled his gun out, and as he did, he wondered what Ulf's answer might be. "Nyjord is Medverk," Ulf said, raising his blowgun and sending a dart across the cavern. It struck one of the technicians, who gasped and fell to the floor. Brion's shots crashed into the control board, shorting and destroying it, removing the menace to Nyjord for all time. "Medverk," Ulf had said, "a life form that cooperates and aids other life forms. It may kill in self-defense, but it is essentially not a killer or destroyer." Ulf had a lifetime of knowledge about the interdependency of life. He grasped the essence of the idea and ignored all the verbal complications and confusions. He had killed the magter, who were his own people, because they were Umedverk, against life, and he had saved his enemies because they were Medverk. With this realization came the painful knowledge that the planet and the people that had produced this understanding were dead. In the cavern, the magter saw the destruction of their plans and the cave mouth from which the bullets had come. Silently they rushed to kill their enemy, a concerted effort of emotionless fury. Brion and Ulf fought back. Even the knowledge that he was doomed no matter what happened could not resign Brion to death at the hands of the magter. To Ulf the decision was much easier. He was simply killing Umedverk. A believer in life, he destroyed the anti-life. They retreated into the darkness, still firing. The magter had lights and ion rifles and were right behind them. Knowing the caverns better than the men they chased, the pursuers circled. Brion saw lights ahead and dragged Ulf to a stop. "They know their way through these caves and we don't," he said. "If we try to run, they'll just shoot us down. Let's find a spot we can defend and settle into it." "Back here," Ulf gave a tug in the right direction. "There is a cave with only one entrance, and that is very narrow. Let's go." Running as silently as they could in the darkness, They reached the deadened cavern without being seen. What noise they made was lost in other footsteps that sounded and echoed through the connecting caves. Once inside, they found cover behind a ridge and waited. The end was certain. The magter ran swiftly into their cave, flashing his light into all the places of concealment. The beam passed over the two hidden men, and at the same instant Brion fired. The shot boomed loudly as the magter fell, a shot that would surely have been heard by others. Before anyone else came into the cave, Brion ran over and grabbed the still functioning light. Propping it on the rock so it shone on the entrance, he hurried back to shelter behind Ulf. They waited for the attack. It was not long in coming. 2 magter rushed in and died. More were outside, Brion knew, and he wondered how long it would be before they remembered the grenades and rolled one into their shelter. An indistinct murmur sounded outside and sharp explosions. In their hiding place, Brion and Ulf crouched low and wondered why the attack didn't come. Then one of the magter came in the entrance, but Brion hesitated before shooting. The man had backed in, firing behind him as he came. Ulf had no compunctions about killing, only his darts couldn't penetrate the magter's thick clothing. As the magter turned, Ulf's breath pulsed once, and death stung the back of the other man's hand. He collapsed into a crumpled heap. "Don't shoot!" a voice called from outside the cave, and a man stepped through the swirling dust and smoke to stand in the beam from the light. Brion clutched wildly at Ulf's arm, dragging the blowgun from the Disan's mouth. The man in the light wore a protective helmet, thick boots, and a pouch-hung uniform. He was a Nyjorder. The realization was almost impossible to accept. Brion had heard the bombs fall. Yet the Nyjord soldier was here. The two facts couldn't be accepted together. "Would you keep a hold on his arm, sir, just in case?" the soldier said, glancing warily at Ulf's blowpipe. "I know what those darts can do." He pulled a microphone from one of his pockets and spoke into it. More soldiers crowded into the cave, and Professor Commander Kraft came in behind them. He looked strangely out of keeping in the dusty combat uniform. The gun was even more incongruous in his blue-veined hand. After giving the pistol to the nearest soldier with an air of relief, he stumbled quickly over to Brion and took his hand. "It is a profound and sincere pleasure to meet you in person," he said, "and your friend Ulf as well." "Would you kindly explain what is going on?" Brion said thickly. He was obsessed by the strange feeling that none of this could possibly be happening. "We will always remember you as the man who saved us from ourselves," Kraft said, once again the professor instead of the commander. "What Brion wants are facts, Grandpa, not speeches," High said. The bent form of the leader of the rebel Nyjord army pushed through the crowd of taller men until he stood next to Kraft. "Simply stated, Brion, your plan succeeded. Kraft relayed your message to me, and as soon as I heard it, I turned back and met him on his ship. I'm sorry that Telt's death, but he found what we were looking for. I couldn't ignore his report of radioactive traces. Your girlfriend arrived with a hacked-up corpse at the same time I did, and we all took a long look at the green leech in its skull. Her explanation of what it is made significant sense. We were already carrying out landings when we had your call about something having been stored in the magter tower. After that, it was just a matter of following tracks and the transmitter you planted." "But the explosions at midnight," Brion broke in. "I heard them." "You were supposed to," Nahais laughed. "Not only you, but the magter in this cave. We figured they would be armed and the cave strongly defended. So at midnight we dropped a few large chemical explosive bombs at the entrance. Enough to kill the guards without bringing the roof down. We also hoped that the magter deeper in would leave their posts or retreat from imagined radiation. And they did. It worked like a charm. We came in quietly and took them by surprise, made a clean sweep, killed the ones we couldn't capture." "One of the renegade jump space technicians was still alive," Kraft said. "He told us about your stopping the bombs aimed at Nyjord, the two of you." None of the Nyjorders there could add anything to his words, not even the cynical Highs. But Brion could empathize their feelings, the warmth of their intense relief and happiness. It was a sensation he would never forget. "There is no more war," Brion translated for Ulv, knowing that the Disan had understood nothing of the explanation. As he said it, he realized there was one glaring error in the story. "You couldn't have done it," Brion said. "You landed on this planet before you had my message about the tower. That means you still expected the magter to be sending their bombs to Nyjord, and you made the landings in spite of this knowledge." "Of course," Professor Kraft said, astonished at Brion's lack of understanding. "What else could we do? The magter are sick." Hyes laughed aloud at Brion's baffled expression. "You have to understand Nyjord's psychology," he said. "When it was a matter of war and killing, my planet could never agree on an intelligent course. War is so alien to our philosophy that it couldn't even be considered correctly. That's the trouble with being a vegetable eater in a galaxy of carnivores. You're easy prey for the first one that lands on your back. Any other planet would have jumped on the magter with both feet and shaken the bombs out of them. We fumbled it so long it almost got both worlds killed. Your mind parasite drew us back from the brink." "I don't understand," Brion said. "A simple matter of definition. Before you came, we had no way to deal with the magter here on Dis. They really were alien to us. Nothing they did made sense, and nothing we did seemed to have the slightest effect on them. But you discovered that they were sick, and that's something we know how to handle. We're united again. My rebel army was instantly absorbed into the rest of the Nyjord forces by mutual agreement. Doctors and nurses are on the way here now. Plans were put underway to evacuate what part of the population we could until the bombs were found. The planet is united again, and working hard." "Because the magter are sick, infected by a destructive life form?" Brion asked. "Exactly so," Professor Kraft said. "We are civilized after all. You can't expect us to fight a war, and you surely can't expect us to ignore the plight of sick neighbors." "No, you surely can't," Brion said, sitting down heavily. He looked at Ulv, to whom the speech had been incomprehensible. Beyond him, Hyes wore his most cynical expression as he considered the frailties of his people. "Hyes," Brion called out, "you translate all that into Disan and explain to Ulv. I wouldn't dare."
Chapter 19. Dis was a floating golden ball, looking like a schoolroom globe in space. No clouds obscured its surface, and from this distance it seemed warm and attractive set against the cold darkness. Brion almost wished he were back there now, as he sat shivering inside the heavy coat. He wondered how long it would be before his confused body temperature controls decided to turn off the summer adjustment. He hoped it wouldn't be as sudden or as drastic as turning it on had been. Delicate as a dream, Leah's reflection swam in space next to the planet. She had come up quietly behind him in the spaceship's corridor, only her gentle breath and mirrored face telling him she was there. He turned quickly and took her hands in his. "You're looking infinitely better," he said. "Well, I should," she said, pushing back her hair in an unconscious gesture with her hand. "I've been doing nothing but lying in the ship's hospital while you were having such a fine time this last week, rushing around down there, shooting all the magter." "Just gassing them," he told her. "The Nyjorders can't bring themselves to kill any more, even if it does raise their own casualty rates. In fact, they are having difficulty restraining the Disans led by Ulv, who are happily killing any magter they see as being pure medwerk." "What will they do when they have all those frothing magter madmen?" "They don't know yet," he said. "They won't really know until they see what an adult magter is like with his brain parasite dead and gone. They're having better luck with the children. If they can catch them early enough, the parasite can be destroyed before it has done too much damage." Leah shuddered delicately and let herself lean against him. "I'm not that sturdy yet. Let's sit down while we talk." There was a couch opposite the viewport where they could sit and still see Dis. "I hate to think of a magter deprived of his symbiote," she said. "If his system can stand the shock, I imagine there will be nothing left except a brainless hulk. This is one series of experiments I don't care to witness. I rest secure in the knowledge that the Nyjorders will find the most humane solution." "I'm sure they will," Brion said. "Now, what about us?" she said disconcertingly, leaning back in his arms.
I must say, you have the highest body temperature of anyone I have ever touched. It's positively exciting."
This jarred Brion even more. He didn't have her ability to put past horrors out of the mind by substituting present pleasures. "Well, just what about us?" he said, with masterful inappropriateness. She smiled as she leaned against him. "You weren't as vague as that the night in the hospital room. I seem to remember a few other things you said, and did. You can't claim you're completely indifferent to me, Brion Brandd, so I'm only asking you what any outspoken Anvharian girl would. Where do we go from here? Get married?" There was a definite pleasure in holding her slight body in his arms, and feeling her hair against his cheek. They both sensed it, and this awareness made his words sound that much more ugly. "Leah, darling, you know how important you are to me. But you certainly realize that we could never get married." Her body stiffened, and she tore herself away from him. "Why, you great, fat, egotistical slab of meat! What do you mean by that? I like you, Leah. We have plenty of fun and games together, but surely you realize that you aren't the kind of girl that one takes home to mother." "Leah, hold on," he said. "You know better than to say a thing like that. What I said has nothing to do with how I feel towards you. But marriage means children, and you are a biologist enough to know about Earth's genes."
"Intolerant yokel!"
she cried, slapping his face. He didn't move or attempt to stop her.
"I expected better from you, with all your pretensions of understanding. But all you can think of are the horror stories about worn-out genes of Earth.
You're the same as every other big, strapping bigot from the frontier planets.
I know how you look down on our small size, our allergies, our hemophilia, and all the other weaknesses that have been bred back and preserved by the race.
You hate—" "But that's not what I meant at all," he interrupted, shocked, his voice drowning hers out. "Yours are the strong genes, the viable strains. Mine are the deadly ones. A child of mine would kill itself and you in a natural birth, if it managed to live to term. You're forgetting that you are the original Homo sapiens. I'm a recent mutation."
Leah was frozen by his words. They revealed the truth she had known but would never permit herself to consider.
"Earth is home, the planet where mankind developed," he said. "The last few thousand years you may have been breeding weaknesses back into the genetic pool, but that's nothing compared to the hundreds of millions of years that it took to develop man. How many newborn babies live to be a year of age on Earth?"
"Why, almost all of them. A fraction of 1% die each year. I can't recall how many."
"Earth is home," he said again gently. "When men leave home they can adapt to different planets, but a price must be paid. A terrible price is in dead infants. The successful mutations live, the failures die. Natural selection is a brutally simple affair. When you look at me, you see a success. I have a sister, a success too. Yet my mother had 6 other children who died when they were still babies, and several others that never came to term. You know about these things, don't you, Leah?"
I know,
she said, sobbing into her hands. He held her now, and she didn't pull away.
"I know it all as a biologist, but I am so awfully tired of being a biologist, and the top of my class and a mental match for any man. When I think about you, I do it as a woman, and can't admit any of this. I need someone, Brion, and I needed you so much because I loved you."
She paused and wiped her eyes.
"You're going home, aren't you? Back to Anvhar? When?"
"I can't wait too long," he said, unhappily. "Aside from my personal wants, I find myself remembering that I'm a part of Anvhar. When you think of the number of people who suffered and died, or adapted, so that I could be sitting here now, well, it's a little frightening. I suppose it doesn't make sense logically that I should feel indebted to them, but I do. Anything I do now, or in the next few years, won't be as important as getting back to Anvhar."
"And I won't be going back with you."
It was a flat statement, the way she said it, not a question. "No, you won't be," he said. "There is nothing on Anvhar for you." Leah was looking out the port at Dis, and her eyes were dry now.
"Way back in my deeply buried unconscious, I think I knew it would end this way," she said. "If you think your little lecture on the origins of man was a novelty, it wasn't. It just reminded me of a number of things my glands had convinced me to forget. In a way, I envy you, your weightlifter wife-to-be and your happy kiddies. But not very much. Very early in life I resigned myself to the fact that there was no one on Earth I would care to marry. I always had these teenage dreams of a hero from space who would carry me off, and I guess I slipped you into that pattern without realizing it. I'm old enough now to face the fact that I like my work more than a banal marriage, and I'll probably end up a frigid and virtuous old maid, with more degrees and titles than you have shot-putting records. As they looked through the port, Dis began slowly to contract. Their ship drew away from it, heading towards Nyord. They sat apart, without touching now. Leaving Dis meant leaving behind something they had shared. They had been strangers together there, on a strange world. For a brief time their lifelines had touched. That time was over now. "Don't we look happy?" Hiss said, shambling towards them. "Fall dead and make me even happier then," Leah snapped bitterly. Hiss ignored the acid tone of her words and sat down on the couch next to them. Since leaving the command of his rebel Nyord army, he seemed much mellower. "Going to keep on working for the Cultural Relationships Foundation, Brion?" he asked. "You're the kind of man we need." Brion's eyes widened as the meaning of the last words penetrated. "Are you in the CRF?" "Field agent for Nyord," he said. "I hope you don't think those helpless office types like Fossil or Merv really represented us there. They just took notes and acted as a front and cover for the organization. Nyord is a fine planet, but a gentle guiding hand behind the scenes is needed, to help them find their place in the galaxy before they are pulverized." "What's your dirty game, Hiss?" Leah asked, scowling. "I've had enough hints to suspect for a long time that there was more to the CRF than the sweetness and light part I have seen. Are you people egomaniacs, power-hungry, or what?" "That's the first charge that would be leveled at us if our activities were publicly known," Hiss told her. "That's why we do most of our work undercover. The best fact I can give you to counter the charge is money. Just where do you think we get the funds for an operation this size?" He smiled at their blank looks. "You'll see the records later, so there won't be any doubt. The truth is that all our funds are donated by planets we have helped. Even a tiny percentage of a planetary income is large. Add enough of them together and you have enough money to help out other planets. And voluntary gratitude is a perfect test, if you stop to think about it. You can't talk people into liking what you have done. They have to be convinced. There have always been people on CRF worlds who knew about our work and agreed with it enough to see that we are kept in funds." "Why is it you are telling me all this super-secret stuff?" Leah asked. "Isn't it obvious? We want you to keep on working for us. You can name whatever salary you like. As I said, there is no shortage of cash." Hiss glanced quickly at them both and delivered the clinching argument. "I hope Brion will go on working with us too. He is the kind of field agent we desperately need, and it is almost impossible to find." "Just show me where to sign," Leah said, and there was life in her voice once again. "I wouldn't exactly call it blackmail," Brion smiled. "But I suppose if you people can juggle planetary psychologies, you must find that individuals can be pushed around like chessmen. Though you should realize that very little pushing is required this time." "Will you sign on?" Hiss asked. "I must go back to Anvhar," Brion said. "But there really is no pressing hurry." "Earth," said Leah, "is overpopulated enough as it is.